Okay, thank you for joining today's class, and I apologize that it started 30 minutes late instead of our usual time at 10 o'clock because I had a meeting which lasted up until 20 past 10, so I had to shift it from 10 a.m. to 10:30 for today. Yeah. Before we start, Matemba, I can see your hands is up. Is your hand up or is it a mistake? Matemba? Okay, the hand is no longer there. Okay, student, firstly, let's start with the ground rules. The first and the most important rule is to please continue muting yourself and only unmute yourself if you want to say something or if you have a question. If you have a question, you can raise your hands or you can write on the chat thing. Secondly, starting from today and moving forward, we are going to do things differently. On the announcement, you might have seen that we stated that please study all the prescribed material and prepare for today's lecture. So how are we going to do things easy? We are going to discuss the challenges that you are having with this chapter or with this unit, and I'll be answering those questions. So it's going to be strictly a question and answer session, and I will be doing I won't be doing any lecturing like I was doing in the last sessions. Do we all understand? And most importantly, did you all prepare for today's lecture?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, who's speaking? Who just said yes, ma'am?
That's Richard.
Richard. Okay, thank you, Richard. Other students, did you prepare for today's lecture? Okay, can I take silence as in you are agreeing you prepared? Okay, today we are going to talk about the variable consequences of a civil marriage, specifically focusing on marriage in community of property. So, marriage in community of property, it is the default marriage contract that spouses enter into when they enter into a marriage and they don't enter into an antinatural contract. Can you please mute yourself? I can't see. There is somebody. Okay, thank you so much. So, does anybody have any question before maybe I ask a question? Does anybody have any question with regard to anything on study unit, the variable consequences of a civil marriage, specifically in community of property?
Yes, I have a question, ma'am.
Okay, Richard.
Um, I have a problem with accrual. I do not know how this accrual thing, come about.
Okay,
Because
yeah, okay. Sorry to disturb you, Richard. We are going to talk about accrual in our next session because the variable consequences, there's two types. There is in community of property and out of community of property. Out of community of property, it is with the accrual or without, which is complete separation. So we are gonna talk about it either next week or in the next session. Today, I want us to talk about marriage in community of property, which is the default marriage contract.
thank you so much,
So,
ma'am.
okay. So let me just ask. Anyone can ask you. I just said marriage in community of property. It is a default marriage contract. So, what are the rebuttable presumption, or how can one prove that we are not married in community of property? Anybody, what are the rebuttable presumption regarding marriage in community of property? How does one know that no, these spouses are not married in community of property? Anybody? There is 4 ways. Anyone? Can I choose a student? Comfort Noticia. Can you just give us one example of a rebuttable presumption against being married in community of property? Comfort Noticia. Okay, Comfort is not answering. Mbali. Okay, student, you really need to participate. Yumna, I can see your hand.
Hi there, good morning, lecturer.
Morning.
So one of the presumptions is the existence of a valid antinuptial contract.
Yes, you are correct. Thank you for that. Anybody else, can you give us number 2? Anybody else? Yumna has already given us the first one. Petile?
There's also the issue of the existence of a valid post-nuptial contract, notarial contract.
Yes, who's speaking?
It's Nonhlanhla.
Nonhlanhla, thank you, Nonhlanhla. The third one, Busisiwe? Busisiwe? I can see your
Yes,
hand.
ma'am. Yes, it's me, Busisiwe. The spouses are African persons who entered into a civil marriage which are governed by Section 22, subsection 6 of the BAA 38 of 1927.
Okay, thank you for that. On that, please be aware that there is a recent Constitutional Court judgment which confirmed that this section it is unconstitutional. Last year, the Durban High Court had a matter whereby the wife was challenging the constitutionality of Section 20, of Section 22, subsection 6 of the Black Administrative Act, which said that marriages of between black spouses who got married and are subjected to this section, their marriages are automatically out of community of property. This has now been declared unconstitutional, and all these marriages are now in community of property. Please go to you can go to SAFLI, www.saflii.org, and on the page go to Constitutional Court, and it is an April judgment. The case is Sithole versus Sithole. So this is no longer applicable. So you need to know this, because although it was one of the presumptions, it has now been declared unconstitutional, and all these marriages are now in community of property.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the last one, somebody said it on the chat system, and then said it is the lex matrimony principle. The lex matrimony principle basically means if a South African woman, a South African lady gets married to a husband who is not a South African citizen, the matrimonial property of the marriage will be governed by the laws of the husband's country. For example, in Zimbabwe and then in Nigeria, their default marriage system are automatically out of community of property. So if you are a South African woman and you get married to a Nigerian citizen or a Zimbabwean citizen, your marriage will be automatically out of community of property. It is also important to note that even if after you get married to the Nigerian citizen, for example, and then later on the husband acquires South African citizenship, the lex matrimony rule will still remain. In other words, your marriage will still be out of community of property. The only exception is when you get married to a husband who was a non-South African, but you get married to him after they have acquired their South African citizenship, then the South African law will be applicable to that marriage. Do you understand? Do you
Yes.
understand, student?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh,
Yes, ma'am.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I can
Excuse
see
me.
the.
Can I,
Yes,
Okay.
we do.
may I
Okay. Who's speaking?
this is Urieta Parsons. May I
Yes.
ask a
Okay.
question?
Yes, I can hear you. You can ask a question.
I'd like to know if there's a valid anti-nuptial contract, doesn't it then mean it's not in community of property? So I don't understand why it's in community with an anti-nuptial, because I thought if there was an anti-nuptial contract, it is not it is an it's not in community, and I'm not sure what a post-nuptial notarial contract means. If you could clarify, please.
Okay. Basically, you are correct. When you have an antenuptial contract, it is out of community of property. So basically, what we are talking about is how can you prove that their spouses are not married in community of property? And the ways to prove is firstly, they must have a valid antenuptial contract, which automatically means their marriage is out of community of property. And secondly, a post-nuptial contract. So spouses who are married in community of property but want to change from in to out without going through they want to change from in to out of community of property, they need to bring a high court application requesting a permission from the court to change their marriage contract. That process, we call it, is a post once the court approves that, they're going to have what is called post-nuptial, because if you sign an ante-nuptial contract before you get married, it is ante before, but after you have gotten married and you get a court approval to change to out of community of property, it is called post-nuptial contract. But at the end of the day, both these parties will have this contract, which is going to be registered at the deeds office. So do you understand now? So you are correct. Antenuptial contract means you are not married in community of property. So it is one of the reasons, or one of the ways to prove that the parties are not in an in community of property marriage. Do you understand? Okay, thank you. Bransfield Shiba. Bransfield Shiba.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Yes, mine will refer to what you just discussed in terms of the last one of the Black Administration Act.
Yes.
Of Section 26, subsection 6, Section
Yes.
22, subsection 6. There's a recent case currently that is in court in terms of the the Kingdom of KwaZulu-Natal, where the first wife is challenging the issue of that he was married in community of property. If we look at that against the Sithole one, where are we in terms of understanding? Because he's claiming that he was married in terms of the Section 26 of Black Administrative Act, and whereas he's claiming that he's married in community of property. Where are we in terms of that case?
Okay, the two cases are different in that the Sithole case was a monogamous, while this one, it is a polygamous, whereby the wife is challenging the existence or the legality of the subsequent marriages. The wife is arguing that I was married first and I am married in with the civil law, while the other ones are married, they are married in terms of customary. And then in terms of our law, a customary marriage and a civil marriage cannot coexist. So while in the Sithole case, Mrs. Sithole was just challenging the marriage contract. Can you just hold on? I'm trying to switch off. Sisipo, can you please switch off your camera and Portia as well? Thank you so much. Whereas Mrs. Sitole was challenging the matrimonial property system, whereby she was saying, I've been married to Mr. Sitole for a long period, but our marriage is out of community of property, and I'm being discriminated against because my other fellow black women, their marriages are automatically in community of property. So this section specifically discriminates against me because of the time when I got married, while the other one is saying, but in terms of the law, because I have a civil marriage, my husband did not have the right to enter into a customary marriage with other women.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yes,
Okay,
clear.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Anybody has, because Brasby, can you please remove your hand? Because I see there's somebody else, but I can't see their name.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, who else is having his hand or her hand up? Because it just say plus one other, but I can't see the
Yeah,
name.
I've got my hand up, ma'am. I wanted to ask
Okay.
with regards to the husband, why has it not been challenged? Why must it be the husband's domicile that must be taken? I mean, are we not equal? Why is that the case, and has it been challenged?
Okay, on the face of it, it is unconstitutional, but for it to be challenged, a South African woman needs to take this forward. So unfortunately, our law has never had that opportunity whereby a woman goes and specifically challenges this. But there are many articles which have been written about this and is unconstitutional. Unfortunately for now, because it has not been challenged and it has not been declared unconstitutional, the law will remain the same, just like the Sitole case. If it was not for Mrs. Sitole for challenging this section, it was gonna still remain law. So we are just waiting for a married South African woman to take this up with the Constitutional Court, and I am 100% that the court will declare the Lex Matrimony rule unconstitutional. Understand? Portia, can you please turn off your camera? Let me look for your name. Okay, student, I'm sorry about that. I just want Portia to switch off her camera because it is a bit disruptive.
Sorry, I'm trying to shut it off. I don't know how to do it. I'm trying, but I think I'll do it now. I'm sorry.
Okay, where there's a mute, that mic just next to it, there's a camera. Just press
Yes.
that. Yes,
But
just
I'm
press
pressing
that.
it. I'm pressing it now. Is it off now?
No, it's off, but
No,
I'll try and do it.
Portia, I think you have to log out and then log in again, or
Okay,
restart your phone.
Okay.
Okay, okay, thank you for that. The student who just helped Portia now. Okay, what other questions or what other challenges or what other information do you want to ask on the variable consequences of a civil marriage, specifically focus on marriage in community of property? Anybody? Okay, let me ask this. What assets do not form part of community of property? We know that community of property means what is yours is mine and what is mine is yours. But there are assets which do not form part of in community of property. What are those assets? Anybody?
Yes, ma'am. Separate assets.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, give us an example. When you say separate asset, remember when you get married, whatever you had automatically becomes mine. So when we say, yes, we are married in community of property, but this is a separate asset, under what circumstances can an asset be said it will not form part of the matrimony of our joint estate? obviously inheritance. Yes, inheritance, for it not to form part of the joint estate, the person, the testator or the person who left you inheritance must have a will, and on their will, they must specifically state that they don't want any inheritance to form part of the beneficiaries' marriage, whether in community or out of community of property. So a separate asset can come from inheritance. The second one, what other assets may not form part of the joint estate, even though the parties are married in terms of property?
Pensions?
Okay, a pension fund forms part of in community of property.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yes. Okay, somebody has just said engagement gift. They are correct. For example, let's say you buy each other engagement rings. Now, I don't want to say the male partner buys the woman, but let's say the both parties buys each other engagement rings. That one remains yours, your separate property, although you are married in community of property. The other one is donation. Ne? Donation is like inheritance. In an inheritance, it must be written down. With a donation, is the same thing. The donor must specifically state that whatever has been donated must not form part of the joint estate. The other things which do not form part is the usufruct. Do you understand when you talk about usufruct? Although it's a property term, is more specifically related to immovable properties. A usufruct is when a testator is when we die and we write wills. We are called testator or testatress, male or female. Is when a testator leaves a property. Let's say my mother leaves a property to my sister, but on the will states that I will have the right of enjoyment and living in that house up until I die. So I am giving the usufruct the right to enjoy and use the property, but ownership will not come to me because the property has been given to somebody else. So
yes.
I've got the usufruct, but somebody else becomes an owner.
The owner.
Yes, and
Ma'am, may
Okay.
I ask a question?
yes.
May I ask a question? Thank you for canvassing that portion, because I think it was asked on our second assignment. So I was finding some difficulties in relation to answering. And I feel that there's a repetition of some sort in those questions. So the part that I'm interested to is the issue of the immovables and movables in relation to what we are explaining, because the issue of the usufruct, it's canvassed there, and also the issue of the real rights. The real rights, so that there should be a condition in order for such a portion not to fall within the estate. There should be a condition. So I just wanted a differentiation between the usufruct and the real right, because I think there was where it was highlighted. So your assistance in that in that relation would be highly appreciated.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. I don't really know much about usufruct because it is mostly dealt with in the law of property. So I'm gonna have to go and do a thorough research on the two and explain to you when it relates to in community of property. So okay, I'm gonna move.
These people.
Okay,
Please
Please mute your mic. Can you just please switch
Okay,
off your mic?
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that. So what I'm going to ask, can you please write that question on the chat? I'm going to research it after this session, and I'm going to respond later on today back on the chat system. So please just write it on the chat, and then I'm going to give you an answer today.
Not a problem, ma'am. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, what about damages? Let's give an example. Let's say you are married in community of property and your spouse has an accident, a car accident, and road accident fund pays them 1.2 million. What is the legal position? What is the legal position regarding damages, for example, road accident fund? Do you think road accident fund forms part of the joint estate?
No, it doesn't, because it forms part of the non-part. It's a delete. So any I don't know how to explain it, but anything that it comes in a form of delete, it should not form part to the estate, the community in property joint estate.
Okay, you are correct. There are damages which do not form part of in community of property. For example, the road accident fund for personal injuries, or when spouses are suing each other. Firstly, you need to understand that spouses who are married in community of property cannot sue each other unless if one sues the other for personal injury. Let's say there was domestic violence and you ended up your body getting bodily injuries. So you can sue your spouse, and those damages becomes your own separate ones. If, let's say, the spouse does not have money to pay you during the termination of the marriage, there will be an adjustment whereby those damages you're going to be compensated, they're going to be given to you because they do not form part of the joint estate.
Sorry, ma'am, can you please address the Portia issue? It's very destructive.
Okay, I'm trying to look for her name so that I can actually switch off the camera from my side. I'm struggling to find her name. So while I'm busy talking to you, at the same time, I'm busy trying to find her name. Portia, do you mind logging off and logging on again? Portia?
Switch off your mic.
Portia? Okay, Portia,
switch off your mic. Simple. Press the button for the video. Switch off. Okay, let me try again. Audio. Do you want me to put the audio off, the speaker off? No, the video.
Okay, just
video.
log out and log in again. And when you log in, make sure that your video is off.
Okay, I'll try that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that.
All right.
Okay. Can we move forward and talk about liabilities now? Before we talk about liabilities, does anybody have any question regarding what we have spoken about, what spouses can have, or what is it that they can share before we talk about debts? Because remember, when you are married in community of property, it's sharing of assets that you had before you got married and during the marriage, and liabilities, debts that you had before the marriage and that you acquire or you make during the marriage. So anybody else on assets before we talk about debts?
Sorry, ma'am.
Sorry,
Can
okay.
I ask?
Okay. Who's speaking?
It's Sipiwa here. I just
Okay.
wanted to find out, when you're talking about the payments in terms of the delicts that are excluded, what about insurance policies like life covers? So not life covers, but let's say your insurance company pays you out some monies. Does it also, is it excluded or included?
Okay, it depends. It depends on what the payment, the insurance was for. For example, most of the time, or the most insurances that we have are the life covers, but life covers only pays when there is death. The insure what the funerals, when there's funeral, and insurance for cars. But if it's an insurance which covers you for your bodily harm, that one does not form part of the estate. So the question is gonna be the insurance, what was it paying for? And that is gonna determine whether this falls into what forms part of the joint estate or it does not form part of the joint estate. Do you understand?
Okay,
Sipiwe?
yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I do understand. So if the insurance pays me out for my car, let's say it was stolen, and then they pay me out, that will be excluded. That will be included.
That will
But
be
if it's a bodily, then that is excluded.
Excluded, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Eshla, I can see your hand. Nkosana, can see your hand also. Eshla, can you hear us? Okay, you can talk.
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. I'm just confused. I'm not sure if I am mixing things up. But before I ask the question, it's kind of based on the assignment. I'm not sure if assignment 1 specifically. I'm not sure if we can go ahead and ask questions based on that, or if I'd have to email you separately because of how the due dates have been set up.
Okay, unfortunately, I cannot answer assignment questions now unless if you you want clarity on something. But it's gonna be best if you send me an email so that I can have a look at your question.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nkosana? Nkosana?
Hello. My apologies.
Hello.
Ask
Okay,
my
I
question.
also see JP. Who just said hello? Is it JP?
No, it's Munatsray.
Who?
Munatsray.
Munatsray. Okay, after you, Munatsray is gonna be Nkosana. After
Okay.
Munatsray, you can ask.
Okay, I wanted to ask, for example, I'm in a marriage with my husband, right? And then we are married in community of property. And for example, he gets sued. Will I also be paid? Does it also affect me, or it's just his own issue?
Okay, we are going to talk about that when you talk about liabilities. But I keep on saying when you are married in contempt of property, you are liable also for debt. So when you talk about liabilities, then we'll talk about, okay, what debt can you as a spouse be liable for, and what debt can actually only the spouse can be sued for. Understand? Okay.
Thank you.
Nkosana? Nkosana?
Yes, ma'am. I think I've asked my question and then you responded that I must send an email to you. So I did. Yes.
Okay. JP, are you sorted? Because I see your hand is no longer up. JP? Okay. Let's talk about liabilities. Liabilities basically are debts.
Sorry, ma'am. I wanted to ask a question. I've been raising my hand.
Billy. Who's speaking? Billy. Okay.
Ma'am, I want to ask about the donations. You mentioned something like saying that donations they also form part of the asset, but only if the person who is donating already stated if whatever that they are donating can be shared. So I want to ask if maybe somebody donates a house to me and the house belongs to, and I am married with someone else. Does that mean that they also need to state it that it should belong to us as couple or what?
Yes. If you are donated a house and the donation is in writing, so if the donor does not want your wife to have a share, have 50% of the house, they must specifically state that they are only giving you that house and it should not form part of your joint estate. If that clause is not there, your wife will automatically own 50% of the house.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Now, liabilities. Liabilities, what kind of liabilities do we have? By basically what I'm asking is contractual debt and intellectual debt. What do you think the position is when it comes to contractual debt? What does the law say regarding spouses who are married in community of property and they want to take out debt? Let's say, for example, a spouse wants to buy a house. Do you think the spouse must both consent, or do you think it's okay that maybe just one spouse can buy a house without the consent of the other? And then let's say that happens. Now, my second question will be, what happens if one spouse or the person who bought the house now wants to sell it? So let's start with the house first. What do you think the position is regarding spouses who are married in community of property and they want to purchase a house? Anybody, does anybody know the legal position regarding being married in community of properties and immovable property, being married COP and having to buy a house? Brunello, I see your hand is up. Brunello?
Yes. If somebody is married in community of property and they want to buy a house, they need the consent of the spouse. You can't buy a house alone if you're married in community of property, so you need the consent of your spouse.
Okay, then what do you think happens if they want to sell the house? Because sometimes it has happened many times that for some reason a spouse managed to buy a house without the consent of the other spouse. So if a spouse manages to buy a house without the consent of the spouse and they now want to sell that house, do you think now that other spouse must give consent, or it's just a situation of because I was not involved in the beginning, even now when you dispose of this house, I will not be involved?
I think the same rule would apply if you want to sell the house. But you need the consent of the spouse.
Okay, let's hear what others are saying. No, let's start with Joreta, because not Joreta, Butali, because his name or her name has been out. Butali? Butali? Butali R? Okay, Butali cannot hear us. Shanice? Shanice, can you hear us? Shanice?
Yes,
Yes, okay, yes, I see your hand is up.
I wanted to ask about assets before you started on the liability. So again, I put my question in the notes. I just wanted you to speak on replacement assets and the fruits or proceeds of assets and how they don't form part of the joint estate.
Okay, you are saying the assets which, okay, repeat your question again. What
Okay,
assets?
my question, it says in the textbook that some of the assets don't form part of the joint estate, such as the replacement assets and the fruits of assets that, like maybe the fruits of a donation or something like that.
Yeah.
The proceeds of a donation and replacement assets. I just wanted you to explain that.
Okay, basically that means, for example, let's say you get something through inheritance. You get money, and then let's say you get 1 million, and then from that million you go and buy a house. So that house are the fruits of what you got from the inheritance. So that also will not form part of the joint estate. So whatever has been excluded from forming part of the joint estate, if it bears any fruit, even those fruits are going to be excluded.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yes, I understand. My other question is, what are replacement assets?
Okay, replacement asset is like, let's say I was given a car, then something happens to it, and then I replace it. You understand? Replacing the asset that I had, so that like a car, so that I'm able to be mobile.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even the car that is replaced is also not form of a joint
As
estate.
long as you can prove the link that this I have, maybe a car was actually a bad example, but with replacement asset, as long as you can prove that this came, it is linked to what has been specifically excluded from forming part of the joint estate.
Okay.
Yes, then that will be turned in. Sinenhlanhla? Sinenhlanhla?
Yes.
Okay, we can see
Hello?
your hand is up. Yes, you can talk.
Yes. What happened with the kids outside marriage in terms of assets? Let me say, maybe I'm now married, but I have a child from outside of marriage. Then what happened in my assets? Does they get something, or let me say maybe I die, and then maybe I have a kid from outside, and then now it's 50-50 from my mom and my stepdad. Then what happened?
Okay, the legal obligation that we have as adults is to maintain. We are financially responsible for our children, minor children, and adult dependent children. It ends there. Whether they get access or what, it is a privilege. So when you are married in community of property, your spouse automatically will own 50% of your assets and be 50% liable for your debts. Your children are not married to your spouse and they are not part of your marriage. They just your children and the stepchildren of your spouse, but the marriage is between you and your spouse and not children.
So that means my spouse will take everything that belongs to me, and
No,
then my kids won't.
It depends. For this, you'll need to understand how inheritance works. But just to quickly answer your question, it depends whether there's a will or there is no will. If there is no will, the surviving spouse gets more, and the children will only get if the estate has enough to actually cover the children as well. So if you want your children to get something, the best thing is you must have a will and leave them your 50% share of the estate, but the other 50% belongs to the spouse, and it cannot be taken away from them.
All right.
Thank you. Nkuluba?
Yes, ma'am.
Nkuluba?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Ma'am, I wanted to ask,
Yes, ma'am.
when people are married in community of property, I want to know how does one spouse manages to buy an asset without the consent of the other spouse? And what happens if the other spouse who bought the asset, let me say he dies or she dies, then who's liable for the payments of that asset?
Okay. Can you just quickly repeat that? Because I just want to make sure that you are asking about liabilities and just quickly repeat what you've just asked.
I wanted to ask, since we're talking about spouses who are married in community of property, I wanted to know how does one spouse manages to buy an asset without the consent of the other spouse, whereas the law requires consent for both spouses. And I want to know what happens when the other spouse that bought the house without the consent, or any asset without the consent of the other spouse. What happens if that spouse passes away, and who's liable for that asset?
Okay. Firstly, this is linked to liabilities, right? Thank you for the question. Firstly, you need to understand that there are certain transactions, that can be undertaken, or that must be undertaken with the consent of both spouses, the written consent, or just the verbal consent of the spouses, or transaction where the consent of the spouse is not needed. So the first question is going to be, that transaction or that asset that they bought, did it require the consent of the spouse, or it did not require the consent of the spouse. So let's say it required the consent of the spouse. The second question that needs to be determined is the creditor or the third party who was involved in this transaction. Did they act bona fide in that they entered into this transaction with this spouse, so unbeknown to them that their spouse needed the consent of their spouse, or they entered into this transaction knowing very well that their spouse needed to consent. If the creditor was bona fide, is innocent in this whole transaction, both spouses are going to be liable. The debt will form part of the joint estate, but the innocent spouse will have a claim against the spouse who went and entered into this transaction. So to also answer your question regarding death, for this, again, you need to understand how administration of a deceased estate works. But quickly to tell you, before inheritance and everything, is distributed, there is a process of administration of a deceased estate whereby all the creditors are going to claim from the deceased estate. And if the deceased estate does not have enough capital to cover the debt, then the surviving spouse will actually have to form part of that. Whether at the time you knew or you did not know, it becomes extremely difficult once a death has occurred, because the creditor can say, but I was either not aware that the consent was needed, or your spouse forced your signature. Or let's say, for example, your husband has a girlfriend, goes to the creditors to the store with a girlfriend, and then they faked the ID, and on the ID is the girlfriend's name, but your details are being used. So under those circumstances, the creditors are innocent. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to be liable for that debt as a spouse married in community of property. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Before I continue, before I continue, and I see your hands which are up, I just needed to go back to the issue of what I asked about death and the house, where I asked if can a spouse who's married in community of property buy a house without the consent of the other spouse. And I just wanted to bring your attention to a case. Please, when we send tutorial letters, there was a tutorial letter which was sent to you with the latest new development in family law. And on that tutorial letter, there is a case, Terry versus Solfafa. Terry versus Solfafa. Can you please mute yourself? Can you please mute yourself? Okay, thank you. There's a case, Terry Solfafa, where they were actually talking about this, where the question basically was a spouse who went and entered into a contract of buying an immovable property, and it was held in the case that a spouse, that contract is valid, and the only time the consent of the other spouse is needed is when you're gonna have to sell the property. So I'll quickly write it down on the chat, but the case is Terry versus Solfafa, and it's a 2020 judgment. Okay, so I just needed to make that clear. I see the hands are up, and I also see that we are quickly running out of time. I have done notes for this session, and I'm going to upload them under my UNISA. Please also note that I have also uploaded the summary notes of the 3 previous sessions that we have done, and I will also upload notes that I have done for today, which basically covers everything under the variable consequences of increment of property. Yeah. Michaela Buitumelo, do you have anything to say? Do you have a question? Michaela Buitumelo? Michaela Buitumelo? Okay. Butali, your hands has been up.
Hello.
Hello, who's speaking?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You have covered what I wanted to say, and some other students they also touched on it. So I'm satisfied with the what has been said. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Let's start here. Tereshni, sorry to pronounce your name wrong.
Okay,
Tereshni.
Brensby. Yes.
Presley, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Mine, whilst you will be sending us some notes, can you also assist us in terms of Section 15 of the Matrimonial Act in terms of the powers of the spouses? Can you assist us where there are changes, also indicate where there's a recent judgment, so it happens with whatever that is in the Act, it has been altered by the current judgment.
Okay, let me, and I will include it on the notes before I upload that. You said Section 15 of the MPA, right? So you wanted me to check if there's been any latest legal development.
Yes.
Okay, the latest, I'm writing down case development, and if there's any, I will include it on the summary before I upload it. Okay, anybody else? Thank you for that. Kathleen? Kathleen? Okay, Kathleen cannot hear us. Nkosana, is your hand up again? And Presley, I can see your hand.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, I think most of the issues were covered on this discussion of liability. But one thing that left me puzzled is the fact that an individual spouse can venture to a contract without an individual spouse who is married.
Okay, we are losing you, Nkosana. Nkosana?
Can you hear me now?
No, yeah, now please repeat again. We can hear you now.
No, I was saying most of the issues that I wanted to face your attention was the issue of the liability, but I think my fellow students have clarified that matter. But the only thing that left me puzzled is the issue that I think where you were saying that an individual a spouse who's married in a community of property can venture into a contract without informing the other one. And this, it was founded in one of the court judgments that the contract was valid. But in that case, it was said that the other spouse was eligible to claim damages on the other one. So I just want to know now, if now in that estate they are pleading poverty, there is nothing, and then what gets to be done in that case where there is a property that this person has procured and then never got permission from the other one, and then he seeks to dispose that property, and the other one now is reluctant on the basis that she was not there when initially this contract was concluded. So how is the court dealing with such issues?
Okay, firstly, to dispose or to sell a property, you need the consent of the other spouse. So if the other spouse does not want to give the consent, then the party who wants to sell gonna have to get a high court permission to sell without the permission of the other. And depending on the reasons, the court can say the parties, because they're married in community of property, they have to share the property 50-50. But also the spouse must give reasons why they don't want to sell. So if they say, because I was not involved in the beginning, now I don't want to be involved, and I don't care what's going to happen to that house. That, in terms of the law, is not really a valid reason, especially if, let's say, the owner has valid reasons to sell the house. So the court can grant, the court can give the permission for the house to be sold. But remember, everything is going to depend on what you present to the court. There's also a possibility that the court can say, we understand and agree on the reason given by the spouse who does not want to sell, and we are giving judgment in their favor. You understand? Okay. Is there anybody whose hand is up but has never asked a question? I just want to make sure that we also give other people a chance. Anybody? Shanice, I see you. Butali, I see you. Nkosana. Okay, Nkosana, please remove your hand so that I can see whose hand is still up. Lutendo has not asked. Or have you asked? Lutendo.
Thank you, ma'am. With regards to couples that are married in terms of community of property, and where there's a consent in terms of taking debts, what is the position of law if there are certain, let's say there are certain debts which you take, they say insurance cover for certain policy, and then after death, what happens, and what happens to the estate which is in debt? Okay. So you've got a debt which is covered by a policy, but you've got also an estate which is in debt.
Okay. If let's say the insurance policies would cover those debts, and then those debts get paid, then it's fine. If the estate is in debt, then it's going to affect the surviving spouse, the other spouse, by virtue of being married in community of property. You understand? Or am I not understanding your question? Lutendo?
I'm covered. Thank you. I'm covered. Thank you very much.
Okay. Lisa Mate? Lisa? Lisa Mate?
I just wanna. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So my question is in regards to consent, because it comes up a lot. So I just want to find out if consent equates to some right of ownership, or is it just me giving my word to say yes or no, or do I then have power to dictate what happens, for instance, if we buy a house and so on and so forth, things like that, or is it just consent?
Okay, when you are married in community of property, and the principle of it is the spouses, because they jointly own all the assets and jointly become liable. So it's not just an issue of you are just consenting, you are also going to be an owner by virtue of being married in community of property. So let's say, for example, there's just a small asset which you did not have to consent for, but the fact that it automatically belongs to your spouse, you are going to get 50% ownership of it.
It's just not between 12 and 1. Can you put your headphones on?
All right, thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, students, it is almost
because I have a session with Grace.
Can you please mute yourself? I think it's Kathleen.
Hold on.
Kathleen, are you the one who has been speaking in the background?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to ask something. Yeah, okay. I had 2 parts. One of the students actually asked about the assets, so I got my answer for that. But I also wanted to know, can you give us any information about the exam coming up at the end of the year, though?
Okay, now I cannot give that information, but you will get relevant information on the announcement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, students, it is now 2 minutes before 11:30. Thank you for joining. What I'm going to do is, if you still have any other questions, you are free to send me an email, or you can write on the chat system, or you can also ask any of the family law lecturers or the tutors. I am going to do a further research on the question asked. I'm going to include them on the summary notes that I have done, and I am going to upload them on the under the discussion section on my UNISA. Thank you for joining for today, and have a good day. And please note, I have recorded today's session, and it's going to be uploaded. I'm just praying that we are not going to have any more technical issues, but I am recording today. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, maybe before you go,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.